Story 1. I worked as a bouncer and dealt with some drunk customers who became violent. I became very good at dodging thrown bottles. One night, I was asked to escort someone out. I grabbed his shoulder and started walking him out when he stabbed me in the thigh and was about to go for my throat. Patron hit him with a glass. I needed a few stitches and had a funny walk for a few weeks, but I was fine. The patron who hit him kept getting free drinks. His only complaint about hitting the man with a glass was, "Well, now I've got no beer. That's a bit sad." Story 2. I was shot in the abdomen during a home invasion. I was bleeding out, and the only thing that kept me alive was focusing on my breathing and my friend smacking me across the face and telling me that no one dies from a shot to the stomach. They were obviously lying, but it helped me stay focused and it helped the doctors when I made it to the hospital. Story 3. I was stabbed in the chest a few years ago during a fight with bicycle thieves. I did not notice at the time. I escaped the fight and rode the bicycle away. Later, I checked myself and discovered a lot of blood. I went into a nearby shop, sat down, pressed my finger into the wound, and called an ambulance. I had a punctured lung and blood in the pleural cavity, but I was otherwise okay. The person who stabbed me was sent to prison. Story 4. My ex-wife was behind the wheel of her car with the door open. I was standing between her and the door trying to talk to her. She reversed hard out of the parking lot and the door knocked me backward. Then she accelerated straight at me as I tried to get up. My only recourse was to jump onto the hood. I had the fingers of one hand caught in the hood lip near the windshield and hung on for dear life. She went around a curve in the apartment complex, and I was thrown off, hitting my back and head against the curb. She fled before she was tracked down by the security personnel on the base where we worked. I do not know how fast she was going, probably not more than 15 to 25 miles per hour. Do not let action movies fool you. Jumping onto a hood is neither easy nor fun. It is terrifying. Story 5. When I was 16, my friends and I were out in the woods with a .22 caliber rifle, some cans, and zombie targets. I finished my magazine and handed the rifle to a buddy. I went to set the cans and targets back up when a shot whizzed past my left ear within 2 inches. I walked up to him, grabbed the rifle, and punched him straight in the face. He was ostracized from the group not long after. Story 6. I'm not sure if someone nearly murdered me, but an assailant threatened me with a knife, probably attempting to rob me. At the time, I was on the phone with my father because my mother had an accident, so I completely ignored him. I think he let me go because he realized how stressed I was. Story 7. I was kidnapped, beaten, and had a gun held to my head while in the car. I agreed with everything he said, apologized for who knows what, and promised not to call the police and to do whatever he wanted. He let me out at my workplace, and I immediately went inside and called the police. I felt stupid for years afterward, but now I realize that whatever I did to survive was the right thing to do at the time. Story 8. My ex-wife tried to run me over with a car 3 times. I was walking on the street when she came roaring out of parking lots. She would pull into parking spaces and stay hidden for a time before coming at me. She hit me twice. The first time I went to the hospital. The second time was minor. Story 9. My ex-boyfriend stabbed me. I have never been so scared in my life. Story 10. When I was 7 years old, I was locked in a dog kennel I could barely fit into by my mom's boyfriend's children. The kennel had a master lock, and the key was with one of them. They took the kennel to the above-ground pool and held it on the edge, joking that they were going to drop it. They did drop it, and I was under the water in seconds. The plate at the bottom of the kennel made it hard for them to pull it back out, so they turned it on its side and pulled it out. They did not bother to set me down. They just dropped me onto the grass. I remember my hands crammed through the holes in the kennel with grass between them. I heard arguing and what I assume was a fight. The older brother came to my rescue and let me out. I slept in his room for the rest of the summer until I went home to my dad's. Story 11. My ex-boyfriend was abusive the entire time we were together, and it culminated in him trying to strangle me with an electric cord. Our elderly neighbor randomly knocked on our door because she needed help shoveling her driveway right as I was starting to lose consciousness. He was a police officer, So he maintained an appearance to keep up and immediately switched back to his public persona to answer and go help her. I found out later, when he left for his overnight shift, that she had long suspected something bad was happening because she would see me with bruises and had a bad feeling that night. That is why she came over to ask for help. She called her son to take me to the hospital, and that was when I was finally able to leave him. I will always consider her my guardian angel. Side note for anyone reading: if a partner ever makes you feel unsafe, leave. Make a safety plan and get out. Abuse will happen again and it will always get worse. Thank you for the awards and kind responses. If you relate to this experience, I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart and hope you are safe. For further context, I was 16 and he was 26. I had been kicked out of my house, and he swept in and saved me. I naively thought I would be safe from my abusive family situation with a police officer. This was reported by emergency room staff because I was a minor, and I did eventually give his name. It happened in a small township where the whole department were his co-workers. Many charges were technically filed, but he was never actually arrested and everything was dropped after alibis were provided by his co-workers and a general cover-up occurred. I made a post on a domestic violence subreddit that included snippets of some reports as proof, but it got a lot of attention and I deleted it out of fear he would find it. I was granted a short restraining order basically to silence me, but other officers would still bother me around town and harass me with calls and texts from fake numbers so nothing could be directly linked to him. The second it expired, he began physically stalking me again. It has been many years. I moved over halfway across the country, changed my legal name, changed my number at least a dozen times, and if you look my name up online, it's as if I do not exist. He still pops up occasionally with a random letter or spam texts from fake numbers as a way to say he is still watching. It does not affect me much anymore. You become numb. I have had to accept that he will probably never fully leave me alone. Moral of the story: leave and do not look back. No matter the genders or ages involved, no matter how bad you think it is, abuse will only continue and escalate. Story 12. I was coming home from my restaurant job at about 2 in the morning. I stopped at a sketchy Walgreens to grab some snacks. I was getting into my car when a man ran up behind me shouting, "Please, you must help me." Startled, I turned and saw a large man in front of me. He had a thick Haitian accent. He began frantically explaining that he had just arrived from Haiti and desperately needed a ride to his friend's house to reunite with his family. For your information, a major earthquake had just struck Haiti. Normally, I try to help everyone I can, but he gave me odd vibes, as if he were on drugs. I politely declined. He became aggressive, so I got into my car and drove away quickly. The next morning, I saw on the news that he had convinced 2 young girls to give him a ride. He pulled out a knife and forced them to drive about 100 miles. He made them stop on a side road and began stabbing them. One died. The other escaped and got help. He was shot by police while attempting to flee. Story 13. I was 21. It was an attempted murder-suicide. He drove me into a river at 2 o'clock in the morning on a below-freezing night about 30 miles from town. I was asleep in the passenger seat and woke up when the water hit my legs. The doors would not open because of the pressure, but luckily the windows were down. We swam out. I dragged him to shore. He lay on the riverbank and cried while incoherently apologizing. I led us through the woods for hours until we found a farmhouse. I was mostly fine, but I had hypothermia and a torn anterior cruciate ligament. I told him to kill himself as soon as possible and to leave me out of it. Then I never spoke to him again. We were not together, nor had we ever been. We were just friends and former roommates. I will never understand why he wanted to take me with him. Story 14. My mom tried to push my stroller in front of a train, but my dad saved me. Story 15. A father killed his wife, then came to the school looking to kill his son. Staff convinced him his son was not there after he had threatened to kill everyone in my class. He was caught in Indiana on his way to kill his parents. He had schizophrenia, could not afford his medication, and had an episode in which he thought the world was ending, so he planned to kill his family to spare them suffering. He held a knife to a grandmother's throat while yelling, "I'll kill them all." They are already dead. It was extremely terrifying to a class of 7-year-olds. Story 16. When I was 23, I was robbed at gunpoint by a man about my age, possibly slightly younger. I disassociated immediately after the encounter, so my memories feel like a third-person account. I remember him asking if I had any valuables he had not already taken while he pointed the gun at me. I told him he could check my pockets. He briefly looked ashamed and then let me go. Pointing a gun is impersonal, but reaching into a woman's front and back pockets felt wrongly intimate and seemed to cross a boundary for him. For what it's worth, the only valuables he took were 14 United States dollars, an Android phone that was almost 3 years old, and a third-generation Kindle. Story 17. I was basically a functional light drug addict when I was a teenager. An acquaintance and I were held against our will. She did not make it, I did. It lasted 3 days. One day I went out with a friend and 2 acquaintances to a house. Our drinking water had been drugged. We ended up at another friend's house. Once inside, I noticed there were no doorknobs. The windows were nailed shut, and phones and clothes had been taken. The other girl was much more impaired and was being forced to work the streets. They would take her out and bring her back. I was beaten badly and heavily drugged. I stopped fighting. They did not take me out of the house except sometimes to lock me in a shed. I pretended to be more drugged than I really was and listened to the men talking about where to leave our bodies. One day the other 2 and the girl who worked the streets were out. The man watching the house and me slept. He had been strung out for days and had just failed at a suicide attempt in front of me, so he slept very deeply. They had not locked me in the shed that day because I had become compliant and had learned to act more drugged than I really was. I retrieved my phone from under the man, charged it for 10 minutes, found someone else's clothes and shoes, and ripped most of my fingernails getting a window open. I ran until I could not breathe and called for help. I got clean over a decade ago. The other girl was never seen again. Story 18. When I was about 10 years old, my abusive father decided I needed to learn to swim and threw me into the lake. I struggled and he did nothing. I lost consciousness and almost drowned before a stranger rescued me. My father later twisted the story to claim he had lost sight of me, but I clearly remember him standing nearby, watching as I sank. I am still afraid of deep water. I am almost 30 and I cannot swim. I never tried again after that experience. Story 19. I was held up while working nights at a gas station. I assume he did not kill me because he could have easily killed me if he wanted. We were 2 feet apart, and he had a .38 caliber handgun pointed at my chest. He was older and looked like he was used to committing armed robberies. Story 20. When I was a kid, my little brother had a mild obsession with knives. He collected them under his pillow. Once, for reasons I've forgotten, he got mad at me and stabbed me in the back, literally with a seam ripper. Had he used any of those knives, I'd be dead now. Holy crap, this blew up. Story 21. When I was an early teenager, I went to a friend's house where the older sister was having a party. There was limited alcohol. Her parents were home and we mostly played video games and cards. More people than expected showed up, including some who had already graduated. One former high school athlete began making fun of me and hitting on me. The parents asked him to leave. After making a fuss, he walked out. I was upset and crying and wanted to go home, but it was about a mile walk through woods and dark roads. So her parents said they would drive me home after the party. I was still upset and, foolishly, I snuck out and walked home. A few hundred yards from my house, someone hit me with something, which I was later told was a baseball bat, and stabbed me in the stomach several times. I do not remember any of this, including being found bleeding in a ditch and taken to a hospital. If I had remained there much longer, I probably would have bled to death. Story 22. Tweaker came at me with a knife in Seattle when I was parking a work truck behind our shop. He wanted my cheap work gloves, at least I inferred from his broken speech. Another person appeared out of nowhere and talked him down. I gave him a pair of gloves because it was cold and walked calmly back to the shop. I had a box of about 100 and would have given them to him without a knife being involved. Georgetown used to be a rough place. It seems to have been gentrified now. Story 23. I've probably had more near-death experiences than I realize. But the one that sticks with me is when an electrical technician removed my lockout tag from the direct current power plant and turned the system back on while I was working on it. Apparently, lockout tag out means nothing when it's 5 p.m. and you want to go home. If I had been touching anything when he did it, I would be dead. Story 24. I was at a summer camp in my early teens. The camp was held at a small school that was not used during the summer. An older kid I often fought with was pressing me against a wall and strangling me. On the other side of the wall was a classroom, and I could hear people inside. When I could not get him off, I repeatedly banged my fist against the wall as hard as I could. A counselor investigated and pulled him off me. Story 25. I was technically murdered. When I was 7, I was beaten by 2 people, and one of them choked me until I had no heartbeat. I was clinically dead for 1 minute and 34 seconds. Thank you to everyone who read this. If you would like, I can send the full story in direct messages. Story 26. When I was about 5 years old, my family was having dinner at a family friend's house. They had a child my age, so after dinner we went up to his room to play. I do not remember what happened, but after a while my father realized we had suddenly gone completely quiet. Anyone with children knows that sudden silence is a bad sign. He went upstairs to check on us, thinking we had broken something. When he opened the door, he saw me lying on the floor while the other child was choking me by pressing his foot against my windpipe and smiling. My father shoved him off me, and as far as I am aware, I did not suffer any brain damage from the brief loss of oxygen. Story 27. I was almost stabbed in Columbus. My friend was so high and did not know what was happening and simply grabbed the man by the shoulders and moved him aside. The man with the knife did not know how to respond. Later, we saw him get tossed and arrested. Story 28. I worked in child welfare for about a decade. I was at a house trying to locate a sex-trafficked infant. The father did not like how hard I was working to find his meal ticket and pulled a gun on me. I told him that unless he was going to kill me, I was going into the house to find her. He shot me. The most horrifying part of the encounter was that something inside me knows she was in that house. I drove myself to the emergency room, got patched up, and was then fired for insubordination because I did not wait for police backup when I was already authorized to enter and had a warrant. They never found her. Cielo, wherever you are loved. I hope you know I tried. Story 29. I don't know if it's murdered, but I had a gun pointed in my face while fishing near a marijuana grow site. Around 2006 or 2007, I was hiking up a river fishing for the day, going up smaller tributaries for trout in the fall. I was a few miles in and came around a bend to riverside plants as tall as me. I was 16 and didn't care. I was fishing. As I was working up the water, I heard some rustling, turned around, and there was a man at gunpoint maybe 10 feet away. I said, "I'm sorry. I'm just here to fish. I'll turn around." He just stood there and said nothing. I began walking back downstream, waiting for my time to end. The longest minutes of my life. Now here's the kicker. I had forgotten my stringer. I was in cargo shorts and had a couple of fish with deep hook sets, so I kept them to eat. I put them in a cargo pocket and dipped my legs into the water now and then. Through this entire incident, they were floundering in my pocket making noise. I could only laugh about it in hindsight. My shaking in fear accompanied by my left cargo pocket bouncing erratically. Story 30. When I was 15, I went to a local anime convention with friends. It was my first time attending a convention. We decided to go to a party. I was a good kid and was not drinking, but I had a soda. Someone spiked my drink and took me to his hotel room, where he raped me. When he tried to suffocate me, his phone went off and startled him. He grabbed it and ran out of the room. That gave me enough time to stumble away. Story 31. I went out with a woman who was separated from her husband. She had filed for divorce and had a restraining order against him. She stayed over one night, and the fire alarm at the building across the street went off. Everyone ended up outside at 2 a.m. in October. Her car had been parked on the side of that building. 6 weeks later, her separated husband followed her boyfriend at the time from her house in the morning. He tried to run him off the road and shot him 3 times, including in the face. He admitted that he knew she was at the apartment complex where I lived. Her mechanic later found a global positioning system tracker wired into the fuse box to track her movements, which explained how he found her that night. I am pretty sure he was armed that night. By chance, he picked the building next to where she was parked and activated the alarm. Thankfully, it was the wrong building. Story 32. When I was 18, my ex-boyfriend stalked me and ambushed me in a municipal parking lot in my small hometown as I was unlocking my car to go home. He punched me in the face twice, and I decided to be compliant and go with him. It was broad daylight and there were other people in the parking lot, but either they did not notice or did not want to assist. I will not go into minute details here unless someone really wants to understand why someone you know might do this. But he brought me to his parents' house where he sexually assaulted me and stabbed me 27 times over a period of 4 hours. I survived by not speaking a single word to him the entire time and by not reacting to anything he did. I knew he wanted to cause me pain, and I disconnected myself from the pain and emotion so as not to give him anything. He eventually stopped, fled, and left me there. When I was sure he was gone, I dressed the best I could and started walking on the road. A man I had gone to high school with picked me up and drove me to a friend's house in town. I lived in a rural Wisconsin town. I stayed at her house for over a day before she convinced me to go to the hospital. I was afraid my parents would be angry, which made me hesitant. They cleaned and debrided my wounds as best they could. But because I had been walking around like that for so long, they could not do much more. My wounds did not reach my internal organs, but many cut into the muscle layers. I had extensive scarring over my torso for many years until I was able to have cosmetic surgery to remove much of the damaged skin and muscle in my chest and abdomen when I was in my 30s. Nothing happened to my stalker. Stalking laws were not common in 1990. No charges were pressed. He stayed low for a few years in Minneapolis and then moved back to my hometown area, where he married several times and had 5 daughters. About 15 years ago, he reached out to me on Facebook and wanted to be friends. My father did not want any charges pressed and felt that I had gotten what I deserved for dating him. My mother went along with him. We never spoke about what happened again. It was up to me to work through it on my own. My father is dead, and my mother has apologized to me in her own way. I do not speak with her about it to this day because she feels so guilty and I do not want to increase her pain. She felt controlled by my father for many years until she divorced him after 35 years of marriage. I have been in therapy during the last 15 years, and it helped, but most of what I have done to survive has been based on being honest and introspective. I have tried to become an expert on myself. That began the moment I got into the car with him and has not stopped. Story 33. I had a bully in high school who threatened to kill me. He threatened me multiple times, including once on a bus in front of everyone. Later, when he started driving, he tried to hit me with his car while I was walking home. Shortly after that, he died by suicide, and there was a huge controversy. No one was allowed to speak ill of anyone for a while. Later, I moved out of town and became a counselor. Story 34. This happened when I was about 7 years old. I am being vague because the situation is identifiable and those involved were not publicly identified. An older girl, about 9, forced me to come to her house to play. She molested me. I told her to stop and she tied me to the couch leg. I narrowly avoided being killed. She wanted to tie the rope around my neck, but I insisted she tie it around my waist. She left me tied up, and her older brother, about 16, raped me. Their mother found me later, cleaned me up, and sent me home. It was horrible. A few days later, the brother knocked on our door. My mother answered and told me the girl wanted to play with me again. I refused and never saw or spoke to them again. That was a second narrow escape from further assault because my mother did not force me to go back. When I told her about it as an adult, she said my refusal was so out of character that she made excuses to keep me away from them. Parents, if your child suddenly refuses to be around someone or shows a major behavior change, investigate further. Story 35. I was letting a man who had fallen on hard times stay with me for a while. He was difficult to live with, but I was understanding because he was autistic and had a traumatic brain injury. He also did more than his share of household chores. But he crossed a few too many lines, mostly through absent-mindedness or misunderstanding, and it became difficult. He finally crossed one willfully and knowingly, which really upset me. Later that day, I told him he had 24 hours to leave my house. He lost his temper as I expected he might. There was yelling, threats, crying, and occasional hitting. I recorded it all and reacted as little as possible. Finally, he charged into my bedroom with a knife. I did not expect he would escalate to that level when I decided to kick him out, but I knew it was a possibility and was ready. I had my handgun with me. Luckily, he had trouble opening the knife and hesitated after charging. That gave me enough time to draw, and when he realized that, he ran to the other side of the house. I went out to the porch and called the police. He told them a very different story that they believed at first. When they came out of the house to handcuff me, I told them I had a video. They let me show it to them, and that changed things quickly. Story 36. I was attacked by 3 men outside a bar in Seattle. I was holding my own until one of them shot me in the head with a .22 caliber bullet. After that, they all scattered. Story 37. When I was 14, I went to a local fair with a couple of friends. There were some older guys there causing trouble. Some people I knew were going to try to fight them. I did not want any part of it and left. On my way back, the ones I knew ran past me. One of the older guys was chasing them, stopped in front of me and asked if I was with them. I said no. He called me a lying cunt and hit me. I fell over and he started kicking me. Then his mates joined in. I woke up about 10 minutes later. My head was pounding. I could not see or breathe properly, and I was dizzy for 3 weeks. One of them threw a brick at the back of my head while I was on the ground. Apparently, he had tried to lift a stack of bricks still cemented together to drop on me, but could not pick it up. The only reason I am alive is that he was not strong enough. That was 22 years ago, and I am still part deaf in my left ear, have a spot on my head that hurts if I press it, and get nervous if my back is not against a wall when I am out. Story 38. I was on a first date with a guy named Gabe in 1971. We had met the day before when I was walking through my apartment complex. He also lived there. We drove to an upscale restaurant in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. He had an orange Corvette with a telephone between the seats, which was unusual in the 1970s. Over dinner, he told me about himself. He was part of the family that owned Seagrams. He was a warlock with a coven in Atlanta, Georgia. He had a small plane that he piloted. The restaurant staff knew him and were deferential. I was just 20. I did not know what Seagrams was. I nodded and smiled, but I was uneasy. After dinner, he said he would take me home, but instead he drove to a small, deserted airfield in the middle of nowhere. It was very dark, with just the sound of crickets. He stepped out of the car without saying a word, walked to the rear of the car, and opened the trunk. Looking back, I know alarm bells should have gone off, but they did not. Instead, I reached for a small comb in my purse but pulled out a paring knife by accident. It had been in my purse that day because I had a brown-bagged lunch and needed to peel a peach. I was surprised to find myself holding a knife. Gabe returned, stooped with an arm behind his back, and looked at me sitting there clutching the knife. He straightened, walked back to the trunk, closed it, and got back inside. I will never know what he had behind his back. He drove me back to my apartment, and the drive was uneventful. As he shut off the engine, he made a point of showing me that it was exactly midnight on the clock in the car. He said I was meant for him and that he would visit me in my dreams that night to make love to me. I stayed up all night. Later, management asked him to leave the apartment complex because he would growl at women while walking his white husky. Story 39. My ex beat me severely. My neighbors called the police, who called his parole officer. I was rushed to the hospital with a fractured skull and a broken arm. He was released from jail 2 days later. Within 2 months, he was off parole and disappeared. It has been almost 13 years, and I am still terrified he will catch up to me one day. Story 40. Way back in 8th grade, another student attempted to stab me in the throat. The teacher left the room for a few minutes. The friend sitting next to me got up to talk to someone across the room and left his things, including a completed homework assignment due in our next class. The girl sitting in front of us turned around and grabbed it. We were not close, but I had always considered myself on friendly terms with her. I joked, "Hey, Don't copy his work, do it yourself. Intending it as a tease since she often checked his answers against hers. She replied bluntly, "Why don't you mind your own business?" I do not know why I said it, and I regret it, but I blurted out, "Why don't you go eat a donut?" I had never made fun of her weight before. She stood up and walked away. A minute or two later, someone across the room shouted my name, followed by, "Look out." Still seated, I turned my head just in time to see her behind me with an arm raised, thrusting a pencil toward my throat. She had sharpened the pencil and then come back to attack. I managed to raise both arms to stop and slightly redirect the pencil, but it grazed my neck, scraping the skin and causing minor bleeding. I held off the arm with the pencil while she hit me in the head with her other hand until two teachers rushed in and pulled her off. She was suspended for a week and removed from my class when she returned. I downplayed the event to administrators because I felt guilty for provoking it and did not want her expelled with less than a month left in the school year. Later, I learned from classmates that she had killed her stepfather at a young age after years of severe physical abuse from him. That was common knowledge to others who had grown up around her, but I did not know since I had transferred to that school only for that year. Even though she tried to kill me, I still feel bad for her. Story 41. I had sex with a woman I met at work. She apparently had a boyfriend who found out about her infidelity. He stalked me for months afterward. One night, I looked out my window and saw the man standing in the shadows beside my house. I did not go outside for quite some time out of fear. He was later executed for several unrelated murders he had committed. I would have been one of his victims if I had not seen him hiding that night. Story 42. I am commenting from a throwaway because this is an ongoing case, so I am keeping details vague. When I was a teenager, she was an adult and we were sexually involved. I began to realize how dangerous the situation was, so I tried to break things off. She was a well-known person in my community who worked with children. That is how we met. I had been one of the children she worked with. She lured me to a remote part of town near a large forest, bound my wrists and ankles with zip ties, and attempted to strangle me. I survived by playing dead. She was too terrified and out of control to check. I then walked nearly 4 miles to my friend's house, the nearest place I could reach, and saw her the very next day. I will never forget the look on her face. Story 43. I pretended to be unconscious and dropped my full weight on him. He thought he had killed me. I kicked him in the groin and ran. I reached the steps. He threw me down them and punched me in the face. Blood spurted, and his roommate walked in. I left through the back door and went to the porch light. "Can you help me?" I asked. I could hardly see through the blood and without my glasses, but I recognized the voice. It was a friend smoking a cigarette outside. She took me inside and I went to the hospital. The officer asked me to show him how I had been grabbed and said, "That's how you kill people." When he asked me to touch his neck to demonstrate, it was one of the most painful and powerful moments of my life. He believed me. He had been choking me with both hands on my neck. Story 44. I would not say I was nearly murdered, but it was a notable experience. Last summer, I was visiting New Jersey and rented a room for a couple of months. The house was operating as an Airbnb, so people were constantly coming and going. One man had been there for a couple of weeks, 2 doors down the hall from me. One night, he appeared to have a mental breakdown, called 911, and said he was going to kill everyone in the house and then turn the gun on himself. I was in bed falling asleep when suddenly someone began pounding on the door. I finally got up, very grumpy, to see what was happening. I thought it was a tenant who had locked themselves out. When I opened the door, the Special Weapons and Tactics team was pointing guns at me. They lowered their aim instantly once they saw me, clearly recognizing I was not the threat. I am 5'2" and weigh about 100 pounds, which might have had something to do with it. They evacuated the house, and we had to sit on the sidewalk a few houses down while they swept the house and conducted a quick search. It did not take terribly long, maybe 45 minutes, before we could return. They arrested the man and no one was hurt. The Airbnb host had a 9-year-old daughter who was crying a bit but generally holding her composure. She needed to go to the bathroom, so I helped her while her mother and aunt formed a privacy barrier so she could go on the sidewalk. She was all right by the next day. She is a tough girl. Story 45. Nighttime. I left my location and turned onto a main road when I had a green light. I stayed in my lane for a couple of miles when suddenly someone overtook me and cut me off from the other lane. I did not like to speed in that area because it was a known speed trap. Because he was speeding, there was quite a bit of distance between us. As we both approached a red light soon after, that person acted as if I was following him too closely and suddenly slammed on his brakes. Because I had enough distance, I did not have to slam my brakes but came to a quicker stop while still leaving room between us. Since he had braked suddenly to check me, he still had plenty of room before the intersection, so he crept up slowly to the line. I kept my distance. We made a left turn. He moved to the far right lane and slowed down as if I would pass him. I had to turn right, so I also moved to the far right lane. After the right turn, he pulled off to the side and let me pass. As soon as I passed, he pulled behind me, tailing me closely and turning on his high beams. This was clearly dangerous, so I drove past the street to go to my house and continued driving. A minute later, he pulled onto a side street. I kept driving up a hill and thought he had left me alone. At the top of the hill, I turned around to go back down, thinking it was safe. He was still there and started following me again, this time more aggressively. I thought I could reach a well-lit place like a gas station but felt that continuing to drive would anger him more. I pulled off to the side immediately. He pulled next to me and got out of his car. I rolled down my window and calmly asked him what was going on. He walked toward me, pulled a gun from his waistband, and shoved it against my face. The tip of the gun pressed against my cheek. He started yelling and swearing at me, accusing me of tailing him and saying I was putting his family at risk. Meanwhile, his companion was yelling at my ex-wife for looking at them. At that point, it was not a matter of who was right or wrong. I just wanted to get my wife and me to safety. I apologized repeatedly, saying I did not remember doing that, but that I was sorry if I had. After what felt like 5 minutes, though it was probably less, he lowered the gun. I shook his hand and let him drive off. Before this, I had been indifferent to guns and gun ownership, but now it is hard for me to view guns in a positive light. You can do everything right and still anger someone because you looked at them wrong or did something they did not like, and they will escalate the situation instantly. Story 46. I had an abusive girlfriend when I was in college. She was several years older than me and took advantage of that, doing things like cheating on me, hitting me, and isolating me from my family. She was probably a clinical psychopath, knowing I did not have the experience or common sense to leave or to understand this was not normal. One day we were having a bad argument by text, and I agreed to meet her in the parking lot of the building where I worked. She had driven there and was in the midst of a bipolar meltdown and was enraged. The argument continued in person, with her inside her vehicle and the window down and me standing outside. Suddenly she got a look in her eye, put the car in gear, and I realized without thinking that she was going to try to run me over. I stepped up onto a curb as her car lurched past me. She backed up and straightened the car to try again, and I went the other way. At that point, the bipolar episode had kicked into high gear. Realizing what she was doing, she began banging her face against the steering wheel and crying while the horn beeped with every impact. I stayed with her for another 5 months after that. It has been more than 10 years, but psychological abuse is cruel, and I hope I never see or hear from her again for the rest of my life. Story 47. There is a small pocket of air when being suffocated by a pillow. Slow your breathing and use it. A plastic bag over your head will become tight against your mouth as you fight for air. Pierce it with whatever you can. Play dead. Turtle your neck while being strangled. And the classic. Pure luck that the car was not overwhelmed by floodwaters and that there would have been witnesses. Those are just the ones I remember. Story 48. I was walking on the street in Johannesburg, South Africa after dark. I thought I could quickly walk 2 blocks without being bothered. Immediately, I sensed someone following me. A block later, they were close, so I stopped and turned around. 2 teenagers were sizing me up. I could not tell what weapons they had or whether others were approaching. They asked if I wanted to party. I said no, I was trying to get to McDonald's for a burger. They pushed forward, raised their voices, and asked how much money I had. I remained as calm as I could and said I am not rich. I only have some Canadian currency. They paused, looked confused, then asked if I had any United States currency. I did not. They shrugged and walked away. Story 49. Terrorists tried to topple the World Trade Center in February 1993 by setting off a bomb in a Ryder rental truck. I was on the 70th floor and our chairs shook. It took me and many others 4 hours to exit the building, slowly walking down the stairs in the smoky darkness. Story 50. I am not sure if this counts, but I woke up in the middle of the night to my mom, bruised and bloodied, saying we have to leave, our stepfather is going to kill us. She and my older sister made it out of the house. I was grabbed, pulled back inside, and locked in overnight by him. When I try to remember what happened after he grabbed me, all I can see is my mom's face leaving on the other side of the glass, and then it goes black. I am alive but have no idea what happened that night. Story 51. I received cardiopulmonary resuscitation for 45 minutes to revive me. I went into hiding. He initially got off on a technicality, but I went to court and got him fired so he would not assault any more patients. He was someone I was dating, a security guard at a hospital. He will never work again, not in security at least. Story 52. I got mugged. I fought off the attacker, and when he dropped his knife he ran off. I was hit by a car. I did a double cartwheel over the car and landed on my feet. I then fell down, and when I tried to walk it off I noticed my left leg was dangling from my knee. I nearly killed myself with a box knife while cutting boxes. I slashed open my left arm and blood sprayed out. Fortunately, I was working in a bakery across from a hospital. A tourniquet saved me from losing a lot of blood. The most dangerous thing in my life is me. Story 53. I was about 30 feet away from an active shooter in the food court of a shopping mall. A stranger pulled me from my chair to the ground and told me to stay down. I didn't even process what was happening until I was dragged to my feet and forced to run for an exit. It took many years before I considered going to a mall again. Story 54. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, my friends and I were playing Ding Dong Ditch. I used to hang out with some older guys. We knocked on one door 2 or 3 times and the man who lived there was angry. The older guys convinced me to knock once more with a promise that I would not have to knock on a door again for weeks. I ran up and, before I finished knocking, the door swung open. The homeowner grabbed me, picked me up like a baby, took me inside, closed the door, and had a knife in his hand. The knife was close to me, but after a few seconds he seemed to realize it was too much and that I was a child, not a teenager, so he tried to hide it. He told me never to come near his house again and asked if I understood. Terrified, I nodded and did not speak. He put me down, opened the door, and I ran. I never told my parents because I was afraid I would get in trouble for knocking, but it was a terrifying experience. Another time I was in an abandoned building with some friends. It was a massive institution dating from the early 1900s. Someone came in and started slamming doors. We were terrified and decided the best way out was to climb out a 4th-story window, balance on a very narrow ledge, and shuffle over to a ladder on the side of the building that led to the roof. Everyone made it to the ladder and up, but as I was shuffling across the ledge trying not to fall, I heard the door of the room we had climbed out of open. The man was walking around the room talking on his phone and had no idea I was just outside the open window. After a minute or 2 he left, and I climbed the ladder. I almost killed myself trying not to get caught. We hid on the roof for a while and got down another way. Looking back, it was really dumb. I am shaking my head at how we freaked out and put ourselves in more danger than we were in to begin with. Story 55. I was a United States Army soldier in Iraq. One morning, I had a meeting with a minister in the Iraqi provincial government at his office. A suicide bomber walked into his office at the time of our meeting and detonated a large amount of explosives. The minister had been at our headquarters the day before for something else and ran into me in the hallway. He said he had some time and could meet early to save me a trip, or he was fine keeping our meeting as scheduled if I preferred. So we were able to take care of what we needed to, and I ended up not driving out to his office that morning. I wasn't there. It was common for Iraqi government officials to work with United States military officers, and that on its own was not unusual and did not necessarily mean the Iraqi in question supported the United States. However, the exact nature of our meeting and what I was coordinating with this person was sensitive and not public. I don't think al-Qaeda in Iraq knew why he was targeted. This minister was a strong believer in a democratic Iraq and worked to reduce corruption within government. I believe that was the main reason insurgents wanted him dead. It has been almost 20 years and I still wonder. If I had been there, along with more than a dozen soldiers, would we have been able to prevent this? I don't think so. I wasn't anyone important, so it is not like the security detail would have been escorting me everywhere and guarding every door. They likely would have stayed with the vehicles and relied on the Iraqis for internal building security. The convoy between the two locations was our bigger concern. So it likely would have been just me with my holstered pistol in the room. Maybe the presence of United States soldiers outside would have scared the bomber off. I will never know, but I most likely would be dead. Story 56. First, although I would not call it a murder attempt so much as extreme stupidity, I was shot at while crossing a residential street in 2004. It was random. Teenagers fired and were tried as juveniles. I escaped unharmed. In the split second after the tree in front of me was hit, I wondered why the bark was popping off. Second, 2 months ago at 10 a.m., while walking downtown with coworkers to get coffee, a rough-looking man in a trench coat with golden, wavy hair stepped out from behind a pillar and pointed a small handgun at me from 3 feet away. He said something about devils. I nodded, agreed, and backed the group away without losing eye contact. He walked off down the street, and I called the police, of course. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.